We've got New Balance up on the stage next. Adam Word is here. Adam is the Senior Manager of Marketing Analytics for New Balance, one of the world's major sports, footwear, and apparel manufacturers. In his role, Adam is responsible for using data to uncover consumer insights, develop analytics tools, refine audience segmentation, and enhance marketing activations. Welcome, Adam. It's good to see you. So first, our DV audience is dying to know, does everyone who works at New Balance wear New Balance all day, every day?
Yeah, wearing the product is highly encouraged. We are a business casual/casual environment, so people definitely wear New Balance shoes most of the day.
I love it. That's an amazing perk, and I know that it creates an amazing culture as well. So let's talk about, you and I have kind of discussed the complexity and the confusion that consumers face today when they're asked to opt in or opt out of whatever kind of brand experience they're going through. Give us your perspective on that confusion that buyers face today.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's a plethora of ways that people interact with brands, any given brand, whether it's B2C, B2B, anything. So there's millions of different, or I guess a plethora of ways that people can give consent for their data to be used for different purposes. And on the brand side, that creates a kind of a mess, right? Like you're trying to track website cookie consent, email marketing consent, if they were in a store, if they were at an event. Really, anytime a consumer interacts with your brand across an entire ecosystem, you should be asking for consent to use their data. And then the tricky thing is you have to kind of unify all that consent, attach it to a single identifier, and manage that throughout your data pipeline. So it's really a tricky situation, both from the brand side and from the consumer side, because you can consent. You could give a ton of different options for a brand to use your data, and it's not always crystal clear what they're going to do with it.
That's right. So your team is helping with that at New Balance. So talk to us about what your team is working on.
Yeah, so my team is probably a little bit different than most of the Telium users. We sit a little bit behind the scenes, right? So my team's responsible for utilizing the first-party data that we have across the New Balance brand ecosystem in the US specifically. And we try to use that data to help the business run a little bit smarter, right? So make smarter decisions and interact with our customers in a little bit better way. And so we're a bit behind the scenes, but we are influenced by a lot of the things that Telium touches on, right? We're kind of downstream from the Telium data that you guys are collecting, adjusting, and kind of doing some unification. We're also responsible for bringing in a bunch of different data pipelines into a central repository, getting kind of a unified consumer resolution, and then making sure we manage their consent appropriately across our entire ecosystem. So, we're not probably the typical Telium upfront user, but we do interact a lot with the data that Telium throws off. And then certainly in terms of activating against any first-party audiences we create through Telium, we're heavily involved in that.
Yeah. And from a profile resolution point of view, what does that look like at New Balance? There are a lot of various channels.
Yeah, so profile resolution can take on a couple different things because it really depends on what level of resolution you're talking about and then what attributes you're trying to use to resolve that consumer. So if you think about it, you could go all the way down to a person and an address if they've made an e-commerce order. You could try to go to a household level if you know a few different people in the same household that place e-commerce orders. And so, you can also, it's tricky because you're trying to resolve across channels, right? So if someone purchases in a store and gives an email address that's slightly different, but the same name as someone who purchased online, is that the same person? So there's a couple different ways we tackle it. I won't disclose all of them here, but it's a thorny subject, and there's probably no right absolute way to tackle or any brand that's doing it 100% perfectly. It's an area of probability and kind of judgment calls, and it's something that we're always trying to improve in.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think is coming next from a user experience perspective with consent management?
I think the big trend is more transparency, mandated transparency from brands, which is the way it should be. It's probably the way it should have always been, but now with the implementation of GDPR and some of the crackdowns you're seeing in Europe, and then as well as CCPA, CPRA, and then some of the other new ones rolling out at a statewide level here, you're just seeing a heightened sense of awareness of consumers are kind of understanding what data is being collected about them, what brands are doing with the data, and then how that's influencing things. So I think more transparency on the consumer, the upfront side, and then I think the thing that is coming down the pipe probably a little bit after that is transparency from brands and what what data they're using to inform their decisions, right? So you can easily imagine a world where different marketing offers are made to different consumers. I could imagine like a regulatory framework that says, hey, if you're going to offer consumer XYZ 10% off and you're going to offer consumer ABC 20% off, you have to disclose what features went into that decision, where that data was collected from, how it was collected. I think, transparency is going to be the name of the game going forward. And then also just managing that consent across your entire brand ecosystem is tricky. Like it sounds easy, but it's a really tricky thing to do. And I feel like as more companies become aware of just the massive risk that lays out there, if you don't manage that consent well, there's just going to be more focus on ensuring that, hey, just because we collected and a marketing opt-in through email, like that doesn't mean the store associate can talk to that person using their first name or whatever it is. Like you have to manage that consent across the ecosystem in a pretty conservative way, especially if you want to be respectful of consumers first and foremost, and then stay within the guidelines of whatever regulatory framework you're working.
I know buyers have a ton of loyalty to the New Balance brand, and we love to see New Balance leading with transparency to ultimately drive that trusted relationship that's going to help you retain, those loyal customers. So love to see you driving in the industry in that way. Right now in macro, everyone's talking about generative AI. What do you think about generative AI? Maybe some ways New Balance could use it. How might that look for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert on the generative AI or the models, but I think the exciting thing for me is not necessarily the content creation that they allow. Although I imagine they'll make copywriters' jobs a little bit easier in the future. But I think about just how they'll enable either store associates to have access to maybe better information gleaned from internal New Balance experts, right? So if someone comes into a store and says, hey, I'm curious about running, my left heel tends to hurt when I run more than 3 miles, and I run 20 to 25 miles a week, something like that. You can imagine like a world where a store associate could kind of just type that into a prompt and get like a feedback instantly on our product selection, like from our internal panel of experts from content that they've written. Like it could, artificially glean that and bring it into a cohesive statement for the store associate to then feed back to the customer nearly in real time. And that would enable, a store associate who's probably not a podiatrist to give them the best shoe possible for their specific condition. Yeah. I think the other interesting thing on that is like, as we take an even further step back, like the identity resolution topic that we kind of touched on earlier, you'll be able to not only just use kind of a simple rule-based or probabilistic based or fuzzy matching, whatever your kind of approach you're taking, but you'll be able to, give it a truth set and let it kind of understand what is likely the same consumer. So even if they have, a slightly misspelled name in store with maybe a little bit different email address, like there's like a pretty good chance that they're the same consumer. And I think that'll be able to do it at a much higher accuracy than some of the approaches that are currently being implemented, industry-wide today.
Yeah, those are some really cool use cases. I love the concept of enabling a store associate to have access to podiatry level insights, and how much value that would add, to the shopping experience. So that's really cool. I love that. So you've been with New Balance for a while. You're privy to seeing a lot of the systems in place there. What advice would you share with a team who's, setting out to go out and implement consent management?
Oh, yeah. I would say, it's probably like not a fun topic to spend your time on from an internal business perspective, right? There's a lot more, I guess, like buzzword title grabbing things you could be spending your time on. But in terms of managing like like respecting your consumers, it's got to be like your priority number one. I mean, if just because a consumer has thrown off some information with an interaction with you does not mean that you have just carte blanche access to that information. You can do whatever you want with it. So you have to like, really start with like respecting the consumer and then taking a limited approach to utilizing that data and only utilize it in a way that the consumer, has consented to. So that requires you to like basically ask for it up front and be pretty transparent about it. The tricky thing then is you have to, manage all of that consent across your entire consumer database. And if you're a big brand with tons of different touch points and a huge chunk of legacy systems that have been throwing off data for decades, like that's a really thorny topic and it's not fun, and it's an investment, and it requires, legal and privacy experts and data security and all these people to work together. But it's 100% mandatory. And after you kind of get past I guess like the awkwardness of how do we bridge all of these different functions, and how do we as marketers work with IT, and how did like the legal and privacy fit into it, it just like after you get past that stage of it like you'll understand that it can be a really fluid, flexible, like it doesn't have to be like pulling teeth all the time. And so I would say my biggest advice is to just, you have to start, you have to have some sort of roadmap, you have to know which key people are going to be in the room, and you just have to understand that there's not going to be a perfect solution that whatever solution you design today is not going to be perfect in 5 years. You're going to have to go back and revise and adapt. And so don't think about designing like the solution for 5 years down the line, because you don't even know what that's going to look like. Let's design for something that's going to last like 18 months and make sure that it's flexible enough to where we can update it, and we've built in the capability to change midstream if we need to. And so I would say that's my biggest advice. Don't put yourself into a corner by like thinking whatever you're going to design and implement today is going to be valuable in 5 years, because most likely the privacy and consent world is going to change so fast in the next 5 years that there's nothing you could do today that's going to be ready for it. So, just get started, have a roadmap, have a viewpoint, have an approach, and move forward from there.
Nobody puts consent management in a corner. I love it. One final question for you.
Yeah.
I was checking out the New Balance site this morning. A lot of exciting collabs coming up. I know that there's been a lot of amazing ones over the last few years too. A favorite artist or sports collab?
Ooh, that's a good one. You know, the Kawhi basketball shoes have been, I think, some of the more interesting stuff. There's a ton of collabs that, you know, get dropped in our lifestyle space that, frankly, like I don't even try to go after because they're snatched up so quickly. So and I don't get any special spot in line being an employee. I would
Wow.
say, I mean, my favorite shoes are just kind of the gray 574, which is just kind of, you know, the most standard lifestyle heritage running silhouette you can imagine. And it's, you know, it just kind of fits with whatever style you're going for, whatever, you know, mood you're in. And, you know, that's got to be kind of my all-time favorite, even though the collabs they do release some pretty cool collabs, but unfortunately I'm not trendy enough to pull these things off in my everyday life.
Well, that's awesome. Stick with the classics.
Yeah.
Adam, thank you. It was so fun to connect with you and hear about the way that New Balance is driving transparency with their super loyal customer base. This was really inspirational for sure. So thanks for spending time with us.